From losing control of a single save point remote to getting humiliated by a train. These were the times the smartest man in the universe got played, looped, manipulated, and left scrambling, starting with the moment that gave Morty full control of the timeline. It all started with a dumb vat of acid. Rick spent an entire episode trying to prove that his idea of a fake acid suicide escape plan was brilliant, and that Morty was just too short-sighted to get it. But when Morty called him out, Rick did what Rick always did and built something insane just to win a petty argument. Enter the save point device. A remote that could reset Morty's life to a saved moment like a video game. One click, and Morty could redo anything. It was supposed to be a morality lesson, or a trap, or a petty prank, but instead, Morty took it and ran. For the first time ever, Morty had total control. He traveled, fell in love, lived an entire silent romance, and when it all fell apart in a plane crash, he just hit reset, over and over. The kid didn't just abuse the tech, he mastered it. Rick had handed Morty God mode and assumed he wouldn't know how to use it. But while Rick wasn't even watching, Morty lived an entire life under the radar, and Rick only caught on after Morty's string of timeline resets led to a complete breakdown in the space-time continuum. Planes crashed, strangers died, cops got vaporized, and Rick had to clean it up. And when Morty begged him to undo it all, Rick did that by revealing that every reset didn't reset time. It just created a new Morty and killed the old one, meaning Morty had racked up a body count in the hundreds, if not thousands. But the biggest L was Rick built the device to teach Morty a lesson, and Morty still got the moral high ground. The whole episode started with Rick trying to win an argument. It ended with Morty proving he was the better man. Rick had to admit it, and if letting Morty hijack God mode wasn't enough, wait till you see what happened when Rick tried to predict how Morty would die. Rick handed Morty a death crystal, a tool that showed you all your possible deaths, timelines, and outcomes, all branching based on your next move. Rick expected Morty to use it once or twice, maybe get scared, maybe learn something, but Morty became obsessed instead. He found a timeline where he died in Jessica's arms and decided that was the one. Every move he made was filtered through the lens of getting closer to that one future. He stopped living and started timeline chasing, and Rick for once didn't notice until it was way too late. By the time Rick realized what was happening, Morty had gone full anime villain. He dodged bullets, manipulated military strike teams, and unleashed Wasp Rick from another dimension, all to stay on track for a romantic death that wasn't even real. And when Rick tried to stop him, he got impaled multiple times by a teenager. Morty completely derailed reality and wrecked Rick's cloning failsafe, forcing him to respawn in fascist dimension after fascist dimension just to survive. That's how deep this spiral went. Rick died again and again, trying to chase down his own protege. In the end, Rick fixed everything, but not before Morty turned a sci-fi teaching tool into a full-blown apocalypse. And Rick had to admit, you could build the tech, write the code, run the numbers, but you couldn't outthink obsession. After watching Morty destroy reality in the name of love, you'd think Rick might have learned to stop giving family members unlimited power. But he didn't, because the next time he handed someone a sandbox, they used it to bury a body. Beth turned Fruppyland into a crime scene. Rick thought he was being a good dad. That was how this started. Beth was a dangerous, emotionally unstable kid, and instead of therapy, Rick built her a pocket dimension called Fruppyland, a rainbow-smeared, soft-edged world where Beth could play without ever hurting anyone, a place where she could be just like him, a little unhinged, but in control, except she wasn't in control. Years later, when an old childhood friend went missing and was presumed dead, Beth casually dropped the bomb that Fruppyland might have been involved, and that was when Rick realized she had used the safe zone he built to get rid of someone. Fruppyland was supposed to be unbreakable. Rick programmed it so the creatures couldn't be killed, the terrain couldn't be altered, and Beth couldn't get hurt. But Beth didn't need to kill anything. She just needed to trap her friend inside, permanently. It turned out, while Rick was busy giving his daughter tools to play God, she figured out how to use them like one. She left someone in there for decades. Rick gave her the perfect prison, and Beth filled it without blinking. He thought he had made a sanctuary, but she turned it into a crime scene. And Rick wasn't even mad. He was proud. So if Beth turning a playpen into a murder scene wasn't a wake-up call, Rick's next move was basically asking for it. If Morty and Beth are already running laps around him this early, go ahead and hit subscribe, because Rick's worst L's are still coming. Because when he started cloning himself to stay safe, he forgot that every version of him was just as paranoid and egotistical as him. To avoid getting assassinated, Rick created decoy families that were essentially robotic backups who looked, talked, and thought just like the real Smiths. The plan was, if someone came for them, the decoys would die in their place with no risk, until the decoys started building more decoys. One by one, each Rick got suspicious that the others weren't the real Rick, and since every decoy was programmed to be the smartest in the room, then the only logical conclusion was, all the other decoys must be threats. That cued an infinite loop of Ricks and Mortys declaring war on each other across the countryside. Clone Summer fought Clone Jerry with medieval armor and pitchforks. One decoy built a wooden version of the family just to throw off other decoys who immediately torched it. At one point, two decoy Beths argued about which one was the cooler clone before shooting each other in the face. By the end, there were so many versions of the Smiths, it was easy to lose track of who started it. But the point was, Rick tried to protect himself with versions of himself, and they all imploded because if there was one thing Rick Sanchez couldn't survive, it was more Rick Sanchez. You'd think that after getting outplayed by his own decoys, Rick would have stopped trying to remake people in his image. But then he went ahead and tried to rebuild someone from the inside out. After Bird Person was shot and turned into a mindless cyborg by the Galactic Federation, Rick did something rare and actually tried to save his friend. He repaired Bird Person's body and entered his subconscious to bring him back online. But inside that mental maze, Rick tried something worse than fixing. He tried controlling him. He planted memories, adjusted timelines, and even inserted a younger version of himself into Bird Person's mind to help convince him to wake up. Rick wasn't just navigating his friend's trauma, he was rewriting it, shaping it into a version where Bird Person would be grateful. He was being loyal like old times, but it didn't work. Bird Person resisted. Even in a mental world Rick built from scratch, he couldn't force his friend to be who he wanted. Bird Person saw through it all. He didn't want to be rescued on Rick's terms, and he didn't want to come back just to play sidekick again. And when he finally did wake up, he didn't stay. Rick had rebuilt every cell in his body, but he still couldn't fix a friendship. And if Bird Person walking away wasn't enough to shake him, the next guy didn't even look back. Because while Rick was busy rewriting minds and chasing closure, the one person he had spent his entire life hunting never missed a step. This was the guy who started it all. Rick Prime, the version of Rick who killed C-137's wife and daughter, the one that broke him, the one that pushed him into building the portal gun, the multiverse travel, the entire science god complex. C-137's whole identity was revenge. Every weapon he built, every planet he visited, every Rick he outsmarted was all for catching one man. But in Solarix, we finally saw how that chase ended. Or didn't. Rick Prime wasn't hiding. He wasn't even scared. He was just out there, unbothered, untouchable. Every time Rick C-137 got close, Prime slipped away effortlessly. And the worst part was that he didn't care. Rick Prime saw C-137's whole revenge arc as a waste of time, an emotional subplot that didn't even deserve his attention. And that was what broke Rick. Not that he lost, but that the guy he was chasing wasn't even playing. Rick built an identity around revenge while Rick Prime didn't even remember his name. He couldn't outsmart his clones or fix Bird Person, and now the one Rick he swore revenge on doesn't even care. If you've made it this far, you're clearly built for chaos. Stick around. While Rick Prime outmaneuvered him across the multiverse, the next person to take him down didn't even need science. She used something way more dangerous, a wedding invitation. Tammy was just Summer's high school friend, the cute, clueless girl who fell in love with Bird Person. But when she invited the Smith family to her wedding, Rick said yes. That alone should have been the red flag. Rick didn't do weddings. He barely did family, but he made the trip, wore the suit, gave the toast because deep down, he liked Bird Person, maybe even missed him. And for 1 second, Rick let himself be part of something normal, which was a big mistake. Right after the vows, Tammy revealed she was an undercover agent for the Galactic Federation and shot Bird Person point blank, stormed the ceremony with soldiers, and exposed Rick in front of everyone. It was a massacre, and Rick walked straight into it. He wasn't tricked by a clone or a decoy this time. He was taken out by a teenage girl with a clipboard and clearance codes. Because while Rick was off squanching like one of the gang, Tammy was setting the trap. The smartest man in the universe got caught by being sentimental, and for once, there wasn't a gadget in his pocket that could fix it. After getting blindsided at a wedding, you'd think Rick would have stopped letting his guard down around people he claimed to love, but then came the moment he tried to fix his daughter by turning her into a science experiment. Rick didn't do parenting. So, when Beth started questioning her identity and whether she should leave Earth, Rick came up with the solution to clone her, erase his memory of who was who, and let fate decide. One Beth would go off and become a spacefaring rebel. The other would stay home with the family. In his mind, that was growth. But when the truth finally surfaced, and both Beths realized what Rick did, so they didn't thank him or hug it out because they were furious. What Rick really did wasn't out of love. It was so he could avoid responsibility. He didn't want to face the consequences of being a bad dad, so he outsourced it to cloning and plausible deniability. And that backfired harder than anything else. Neither Beth wanted to play his game. Space Beth resented being engineered for freedom. Domestic Beth resented being left behind. And both of them saw straight through Rick's usual defense mechanisms. In the end, they teamed up to leave him and move forward without needing his approval. Rick thought he cracked the code by cloning his daughter, but both Beths walked out and we're still not at the worst of it. Drop a comment if you've guessed what takes the #1 spot. After losing both versions of Beth, you might think Rick he finally learned to stop playing God. But then came the ultimate checkmate from the one person Rick spent a lifetime underestimating. Rick thought the Citadel was a safe space. A place built by Ricks, run by Ricks, powered by an endless supply of disposable Mortys. He called it structure. Evil Morty saw it for what it really was, a multiverse prison designed to protect one man's ego, and he decided to burn it all down. From the moment Evil Morty faked being a brainwashed pawn in close Rick counters, he was 10 steps ahead. He framed Rick C-137 for murder, slipped into the shadows, then resurfaced in the Ricklantis mix-up as a campaigner for Morty rights. Rick didn't even notice, too busy being unimpressed. By the time Rick Mirai Jack rolled around, Evil Morty was president with full control of the Citadel systems. And that was when the mask came off. He revealed the truth, the central finite curve, a multiverse firewall that filtered out realities where Rick wasn't the smartest man alive. Rick didn't just create the Citadel, he rigged the entire cosmos. Evil Morty's final move was to destroy the curve and leave, because the worst insult to a Rick was a Morty who didn't need him anymore. Rick thought he was playing 4D chess, but it turned out Evil Morty had already flipped the board. He escaped the multiverse Rick built, but someone else went deeper, because while Evil Morty broke the rules, the next opponent wrote them, and Rick never realized he was just another plot device. At first, it looked like another random Rick and Morty adventure, a chaotic train ride filled with ridiculous battles, memory flashbacks, and narrative nonsense. But halfway through, they realized they weren't on a train, but actually inside a story device. The story train was a literal narrative engine built to simulate endless Rick and Morty adventures, monetize their arcs, and force meaning into meaningless chaos. And Rick, the guy who mocked continuity and broke the fourth wall, got played. He tried everything. Killed Jesus, defeated gods, shifted genres, rewrote character arcs, even weaponized meta-commentary. But it wasn't enough. The story train bent every moment to fit a 3-act structure. Rick barely survived it and only escaped by tricking it into crashing with a ham-fisted PSA about buying the toy version. And even that was part of the story, apparently. After the credits, when the story train was revealed to be a literal consumer product on sale in a toy store. Rick wasn't the author, he wasn't even the protagonist. He was merchandise, a piece of IP stuck in a looping morality tale. The smartest man in the universe didn't just lose the fight, he lost to the writers. Some of these losses were tactical, some were cosmic, but every single one chipped away at the myth of Rick's untouchable genius. Because for all his tech, backup plans, and ego, Rick Sanchez can still get outplayed. Sometimes by a Morty, sometimes by a train. If you're into breakdowns that pull the curtain back on your favorite characters, hit subscribe. Next up, we've got every version of Rick explained.